Okay, so now that we've covered the causes of the stock market crash and the causes of the Great Depression, now we're going to move into what the effects and the impact were. So if we think back, the Roaring Twenties were booming following World War One, and then you have this huge stock market crash in the late 1920s. This tumbled into a worldwide Great Depression for many, many reasons. Now, this is the impact. Unemployment and homelessness. Many people ended up losing their jobs. So by 1932, 25 to 30% of the workforce is unemployed. That's 1 out of every 4 people has no job. 12 to 15 million Americans ended up jobless. In Cleveland, Ohio, you had 50% of the population there, no jobs. So 1 out of every 2 people, no jobs. In Toledo, Ohio, 80% unemployment. So 8 people out of 10 had no jobs. Only 2 out of the 10 had jobs. That's incredible numbers. We have seen nothing like it prior to this and following it. So if you look at the number of people unemployed in millions, it skyrockets in 1929. It was down below 2 million people per year, and now it's up over 12 million per year in 1933. That's incredible. If you look at this image, this shows a man who's living out of a car, basically. It's a car shell. He's selling fruit and such out of it. That's his stand, but that's also where he lives. A lot of people lost their homes due to homelessness. A lot of people decided to blame President Hoover for the Great Depression. They said he didn't do enough to protect the American people against the Great Depression, and he wasn't really doing anything to help get people out of the Great Depression. Remember, Hoover believed in laissez-faire economics, which means government hands off. So when the Great Depression happened, he said, well, hands off, so I'm not really going to do anything. Sorry about your bad luck. So you have these settlements growing during this time period known as shanty towns or Hoovervilles. Basically, unemployed towns that are tents or shacks, and people really blamed President Hoover, and so they called them Hoovervilles. In this image, you see a woman and her 2 children really, really irritated with Hoover. This is an image of a shanty town or a Hooverville. You can see that these structures aren't exactly the most sturdy in the world, and they don't have the most cover. So can you imagine being out in the winter? So you're in a shanty town like this, and it's really, really cold, and you have no protection. You have no heat. You have no air conditioning. You have no protection really from the outside elements. It's very minimal protection. Okay, if you look at this is a soup kitchen that has been sponsored by the businessman Al Capone. You also might know him as a mob boss. But you had soup kitchens that were providing people with free food because they had no jobs. They had to be fed somehow, so people took it into their hearts to start these soup kitchens and try to help people. This is Skid Row, and a lot of people are looking for rooms to stay in, get soup, get food, but get a place to stay. So during this time period, people turned to movies to provide an escape from the realities of the Great Depression. Major movies of this time were The Wizard of Oz, Snow White, Gone with the Wind. Movies during this time period were incredibly well done. I mean, they're great movies. We still watch them today. And they were there to help us forget about what was going on in our real lives and live in a world of fantasy. So the demand for goods declines during the Great Depression. If you have less money to pay for the goods, then the number of goods has to ultimately go down because you're not going to keep producing if people aren't going to buy. So the demand for goods declines. You've also got a lot of political unrest. Workers were very angry, and labor unions became more militant. I mean, wouldn't you be very angry if your pay got cut or you were losing your job for no reason? So the labor unions became more likely to fight. So in 1934 alone, 1.5 million workers went on strike. You've also got farm foreclosures and migration during this time period because the farmers can't make enough food for people to pay for it. The farmers had another problem, the Dust Bowl. So during this time period, we had a drought in the Midwest and the Great Plains. Because of this drought, dust got kicked up a lot. It created these massive dust storms that got through everything. I mean, they got through your windows, they got through your doors. Dust storms were crazy. Many farmers who lost their homes, they became migrant workers. And they were people who moved from place to place working on other people's farms because they had nowhere else to go. Like, they had no home anymore. This unemployment problem not only affected people who worked and lived in the cities, but it affected people who lived on farms and worked farms. This is where the actual Dust Bowl took place. So corner of Oklahoma, corner of Kansas, well, actually half of Kansas, corner of Colorado, a corner of New Mexico, and the top little bit of Texas. So you've got really a lot of wind and dust erosion during this time period. This is an image of a dust storm rolling in. It was clouds of dust, just like that. This is what it looks like just after a dust storm that's severe winds that destroyed that carriage and also so much dust everywhere. Again, another dust storm rolling in. Huge, huge, huge dust storms. This is a tractor covered in dust, and it carried all over the Great Plains during this time period. So between 1930 and 1934, 1 million families lost their farms because of the Great Depression. That's a lot of people losing their farms, not to mention adding that to the people who are already homeless and jobless from the cities and suburbs. Again, dust storm. This is in Boise City, Oklahoma, a dust storm. Many people ultimately left the Great Plains and moved to California because the dust storms or the Great Depression had destroyed their life. So you see the effect of the Dust Bowl and then where people moved. So a lot of the people moved to Washington and California because of the Dust Bowl. You also have a huge collapse of the financial system. Many banks closed and people lost their savings, which ultimately led to the collapse of the financial system. 11,000 of 25,000 banks failed. They could not open their doors anymore, and that was a huge problem. Okay, so first you have people cannot repay their loans because they have no money. Banks then run out of the money because nobody's paying the banks back their money. People take their money out of the banks and bank runs occur. Remember, we talked about that last note set where everybody rushed to the bank in order to get their money out of the bank, but there was no money for them to get. And then ultimately, people lose their savings and no longer buy any goods. The New Deal now. So this was how to fix the Great Depression. So the New Deal changed government's role in economics and helping the American people. So it permanently altered the role of the American government in the economy, and it also fostered changes in people's attitudes towards government responsibilities. President Hoover, he served from 1929 to 1933, so he was in office about 9 months when the Great Depression really hit with the stock market crash. He thought that the economy would fix itself and that the government should not get involved, laissez-faire. He provided very little direct assistance to the people suffering from the Depression. And therefore, the people blamed him for the continuation of the Great Depression. I mean, can you blame them for blaming him if he's saying, hands off, it's your problem? People aren't going to be generally very happy with the president at this point in time. So this is why they had their Hoovervilles, and they just weren't happy with President Hoover. In 1932, you have the election and the presidential election, and you have President Franklin Delano Roosevelt versus Herbert Hoover, current president. FDR defeats Hoover hands down, no contest. He was elected in order to fix the Great Depression. As you can see, the blue states are the ones that voted for Hoover, And the red states are the ones that voted for Roosevelt. Yeah, that's a big difference. So the New Deal plan, this was FDR's plan to fix the Great Depression. His goal was to add money to the economy with welfare and jobs. Therefore, you'd have more money to spend. You would buy more goods. Companies would then have more profit. And more jobs were created. And workers are hired. And the cycle starts again with more money to spend. So this was his great idea to fix the major struggles of the Great Depression and get us out of it and get people jobs. So the goals of the New Deal. You have the 3 R's. Relief is the first R, basically relief for the unemployed. Recovery is your second R for the economy. And then reform is your third R for the economic systems. So relief, recovery, reform. Relief for the unemployed, recovery for the economy, reform of the economic systems. These 3 R's will come up over and over again. Hint, hint for you. So the New Deal at work. Now we've got this plan. How does it actually happen? So Roosevelt rallied the nation with his inaugural address. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. He used the radio in order to deliver his fireside chats. So weekly, he would sit down and he would talk to the American people, known as his fireside chats. It would be like an hour on a Sunday evening. He also created the alphabet agencies. The goal of these was to create jobs and stimulate the economy while restoring workers' self-esteem. Now, what's an alphabet agency? We're going to get into that. So if you look at this chart, relief, again, providing direct payment to people for immediate help. The program, Works Progress Administration, or the WPA. How did it work? It employed men and women to do public works, research, and artistic projects for the country. Recovery is the next R, and it was designed to bring the nation out of the Depression over time. Not an instant fix, but over time. The program was AAA, or the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. It increased the government regulation of crop production, and then it also gave payments to farmers from the government in order to grow crops. So this helped. Then reform. It corrected the unsound banking and investment practices to try to fix the economy. You have the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC, and they insured all savings in banks and helped restore people's confidence in banks as well. You'll still see, if you go into banks today, you'll still see the FDIC logo to try and protect the American people and their money. You also have the Social Security Act, which offered safeguards for workers by providing unemployment benefits and retirement. If you have a job now, every time you get a paycheck, you'll see Social Security is taken out, no matter whether or not you're pulling it or not. But you are contributing to the Social Security today even. These are logos and images of people working thanks to the alphabet soup of work programs that FDR created. So continued impact of the New Deal. It changed the role of the government, clearly a much more active role in the economy. And then the legacy of the New Deal influenced the public's belief in the responsibility of government to deliver public services, intervene in the economy, and act in ways that promote the general welfare, which we still see those strong effects today in how much the government interferes in certain activities.